Why did no one speak when the Admiral's hand reached for her rifle? It was as if the entire room inhaled and froze, waiting for something inevitable. Sat alone in the cramped briefing room at Forward Operating Base Chapman, a folding chair beneath her, the barrel of her M107A1 laid across a cleaning cloth like a relic on an altar. Her fingers moved with surgeon's precision, slow, methodical, wiping carbon residue from the chamber. She wasn't hurrying, not distracted, not performing. This was ritual. This was respect. At 28, she had learned the truth few admitted. A sniper's rifle was more than steel and polymer. It was memory. It was every mistake, every life saved, every decision pressed into a trigger. And this rifle had seen more than anyone in that room realized. The others barely looked at her. Navy SEALs filled the back rows, broad-shouldered shadows leaning on the walls. Army Rangers took their seats with the ease of men who felt they belonged. Sat apart, cleaning cloths stacked in neat order beside her ammo box, the long shadow of the .50 cal stretching across the dusty floor like a scar. She was used to the silence around her, used to the sideways glances, used to the feeling of being the only woman in a room full of men who thought she was either a guest or an intruder. No one questioned her record. No one dared. But respect, real respect, was always until it was forced. Her grandfather's voice lived in her mind even now, as clearly as when she was 12 years old in Montana fields, the smell of cut hay and gun oil blending in the summer wind. Never let them see you break. Steel is silent. Steel doesn't beg. She remembered the Remington 700 cradled against her shoulder, prairie dogs in the distance. At 500 yards, she had hit 3 in a row before her grandfather finally nodded. His face was lined from wars he never spoke of, but his approval meant more than medals. Now in a hot plywood room smelling of diesel fumes and Afghan dust, his words steadied her hand as she slid the rifle's bolt forward, smooth and sure. She was focused on the details, the tiny rituals no one else noticed. But today was different. Something pressed on her chest, a heaviness she couldn't shake. She lifted her eyes and saw him enter. Vice Admiral, 3 stars, 40 years of polished brass. He strode into the room like he owned it because in his world he did. Ribbons lined his chest like a mural of bureaucracy. His entourage trailed behind, crisp uniforms, clean hands. Had seen his type before. The kind of men who ordered from maps, not dirt. The kind whose decisions sent 19-year-old privates into ambushes and then signed condolence letters with practiced sympathy. The room shifted, every operator rising instinctively as if gravity demanded it, but didn't move. She wasn't being defiant. She was still cleaning her rifle, still silent, still herself. His gaze fell on her immediately, not on her face, not on her posture. His eyes went straight to the weapon propped against the wall, its long barrel gleaming beneath the buzzing fluorescent light. He crossed the room, each step slow, purposeful. The Rangers looked away. The SEALs stiffened. No one spoke. "What's this?" His voice carried that low, dismissive tone polished over decades of authority. "Get your pretty little hands off that rifle, sweetheart. This is a man's weapon." The words hit the air like ash. Didn't flinch. Her hands kept moving, one more wipe across the receiver, one more inspection of the chamber. Silence filled the space where her anger could have lived. Master Sergeant Williams, seated near the back, cleared his throat, trying to bridge the gap. "Sir, with respect, Staff Sergeant holds the longest confirmed engagement in the theater. 2,270 meters. She." Cut him off with a wave of his hand, dismissing the explanation like static. "I've been shooting since Annapolis. I know what precision looks like. Don't tell me about quotas dressed up in camouflage." His heart should have raced, but instead it slowed. She had been here before, different rooms, different faces, same fight. A battle that wasn't fought with rifles or tactics but with silence, patience, and steel nerves. Her fingers slid the bolt back into locking it with a click. She lifted her eyes now just once meetings. His face was lined with arrogance, his soft hands unmarked by recoil or dirt. She thought of Martinez then, the 19-year-old private who had bled out in Helmand, because she had been pulled from her overwatch position to satisfy a colonel's decision. His face haunted her still. Decisions from men like had cost lives. And then the Admiral made his mistake. He reached down. His hand, adorned with a Naval Academy ring, wrapped casually around the barrel of her rifle. A stillness filled the room. Every operator present knew the unspoken rule. A sniper's rifle was sacred. It wasn't touched. Not by friends, not by teammates. It was zeroed to her eyes, her breath, her heartbeat. To touch it was to violate something deeper than protocol. Tugged just enough to test. Script didn't move. She held the rifle like one might hold the last lifeline in a storm. Her body didn't shift. Her eyes didn't blink. "Maybe I'll just see if this thing is even sighted in," said, half-smile curling at his lips. Her grandfather's words echoed again. Steel doesn't beg. Inside, she felt it all, the years of second-guessing, the whispered doubts, the endless need to prove she belonged. Anger didn't rise. Exhaustion did. Bone-deep, heavy, crushing. Her voice could have spoken, but silence said more. Pulled harder this time, enough to drag her chair half an inch across the dusty floor. The seals shifted uncomfortably. Chief Petty Officer Jackson's voice broke the tension. "Sir, with respect, Viper was our overwatch on the last 3 ops. We walked home because of her." Laughed, a short, cold laugh that didn't belong in that room. "Then it seems you've been relying on charity. Let's see how she handles real pressure." The grip tightened. Something sharp flashed in his chest. She didn't move yet, didn't act, but in her mind her life unrolled in split frames. Her father's reluctant pride when he finally drove her to the recruiter's office. The endless days at Fort Benning where every shot had to be perfect. The sniper's creed pressed into her bones, precision saves lives. And that single shot, 2,270 meters across a frozen Afghan valley, that had silenced an ambush before it began. Every moment led here, every scar, every silence, every ghost. Her hand steadied on the grip. And then the door slammed open. A young intel specialist burst into the room, out of breath, holding a folder that looked too heavy for his frame. His voice shook. 6 high-value targets, moving through the valley, meeting scheduled within 4 hours. The operators stirred, maps rustled, the atmosphere shifted from arrogance to urgency. But didn't release the rifle, not yet. His pride bound him than orders. And knew then, this wasn't about her rifle anymore. This was about the lives that would hang in the balance if men like him decided her worth. Her grip held firm, her silence sharpened, and for the first time that morning she let herself wonder, not whether she could hit the targets, not whether she could prove herself again, but whether anything would ever be enough. What happens when authority collides with experience? When pride refuses to bend, even as lives hang on the edge? The room had shifted. Urgency pressed into the walls with the arrival of fresh intelligence, but the Admiral's hand still clung stubbornly to the rifle's barrel. The operators waited not for orders, not for clarity, but for the fracture that everyone felt coming. His hands hadn't moved. Her grip remained calm, measured. But inside, every muscle was waiting, coiled with the patience of someone who had lived years under quiet suspicion. Specialist Murphy, still catching his breath, laid the folder on the table. 6 confirmed HVTs, he repeated, his voice trembling against the weight of the words. Meeting at 1400. They'll be under heavy security, rotating sentries, likely spotters on the. Maps were pulled closer, pens clicked. The Rangers leaned in, their boots scraping against the concrete floor as they circled the table. But the real axis of the room was still that single rifle, the Admiral's grip. Silence. Admiral finally let go, but not because respect had surfaced. He released the barrel only to reach for the folder, flipping through photographs as though the battlefield were a boardroom. His voice carried with the same arrogance. Overwatch will be assigned to Lieutenant. He's qualified marksman, Annapolis champion, knows his way around a rifle. Didn't need to look at the lieutenant, she already knew. Fresh face. 25 maybe. A good man probably, but not ready for this. Not ready to calculate wind through Afghan valleys, not ready to thread a bullet through a 2-foot gap at a mile and a quarter. This wasn't a qualification range. This was combat, and mistakes here bled. Chief Jackson spoke up, his voice steady but urgent. Sir, with respect, those shots aren't just long. They're surgical. Angles, shifting wind, multiple distances. We need someone who's lived this. His eyes flicked toward, not pleading but reminding. Didn't flinch. Marksmanship is marksmanship, Chief. Don't romanticize it. The words felt like sandpaper against skin. She had spent 14 hours in a snow-covered hide waiting for one clear breath. She had endured desert heat so intense her skin cracked beneath her suit, waiting for a convoy to crest a ridge. She had counted her heartbeats between gusts, between thunderclaps of artillery, between the moments when one shot meant life or death for dozens of soldiers. And this man who smelled of polished leather and air-conditioned offices, wanted to reduce all of it to a competition trophy. Her silence held, but silence could only stretch so far before it snapped. His hand moved again. This time he yanked the rifle with force, enough to drag's balance forward. The sound was sharp, steel scraping against concrete, chair legs scratching like a knife. It wasn't anger that drove her response. It was instinct, muscle memory. The countless hours of combatives training drilled until reflex moved faster than thought. She twisted. Her left hand found his wrist, her right anchored the rifle. A simple rotation, a precise application of pressure to the median nerve. His body bent before his pride could resist. The sound was soft, but it carried a crack of strained ligaments. Dropped to one knee, his face blanching, his breath caught between surprise and pain. The room ignited. Security detail shifted, hands brushing sidearms. SEALs and Rangers rose to their feet, not hostile but ready. For 3 seconds it was the most fragile standoff any of them had ever lived. And then it broke. Released him, controlled, measured, as if she had been holding nothing more than a delicate instrument. She stepped back, the still steady in her grip. No gloating, no anger, only discipline. 6 targets, she said, her voice even, her accent from childhood still lingering faintly. Any distance you choose. If I miss even one, I'll accept court-martial. But if I hit them all, Overwatch is mine. Her words didn't tremble. They didn't need to. The silence that followed wasn't just shock. It was recognition. Every man in that room understood what she was putting on the line. Not just her career, not just her freedom, her dignity, her name, everything. Rose slowly, cradling his hand against his chest, his pride battling with pain. His jaw tightened, his voice ground through his teeth. Agreed. The word was a verdict. Within minutes, word spread. Soldiers drifted toward the range behind the fob, curiosity drawing them like moths to flame. Operators who had fought through ambushes and night raids now gathered as spectators, whispering wagers, shaking heads. Walked with the across her shoulder, each step deliberate. She didn't glance at the faces around her. She didn't need their approval, not anymore. This wasn't about them. It was about the 6 targets, and about silence finally speaking louder than arrogance. The range stretched before them, dusty, sunlit, the air rippling with heat. Targets were set, 6 steel silhouettes, each further than the last. 800, 1,000, 1,200, 1,400, 1,600, and the last 1,810 meters. A shot that mocked the line between possible and impossible. She laid the down, its weight settling into the dirt with the familiarity of an old friend. Her movements were unhurried. She checked the wind. She adjusted her scope. She watched the valley dust swirl like whispers, reading its language the way her grandfather had taught her. The crowd pressed in, stood off to the side, his injured hand wrapped in a hastily applied bandage. His pride kept him silent. His eyes, however, burned with something more complicated than disdain. Exhaled once, her cheek pressed against the stock. The first target shimmered through the scope. She didn't think about missing. She thought about Martinez, about the convoy in Iraq, about her grandfather's nod when prairie dogs fell at 500 yards. Every shot was memory. Every breath was duty. The trigger broke. The steel rang at 800. But this wasn't over, not even close. What did they expect her to feel with 40 pairs of eyes fixed on her? Nerves, pressure, fear. Felt none of it. Not anymore. Those had burned out of her years ago, in sandstorms and blizzards, in the hours spent unmoving in hide sites where even a blink could give away her position. Fear wasn't gone. It had simply been domesticated, tamed into something that sharpened focus rather than shattered it. The lay steady against her shoulder, its bipod dug into Afghan dirt. The desert heat shimmered across the valley, waves of distortion rising off the ground. But it wasn't chaos. It was a puzzle. Wind was language. Mirage was truth. Every flick of dust, every shift of air told her a story. The first target was already down, 800 meters. A shot anyone with training could make. But this wasn't about one shot. This was about all six. She slid the bolt back, ejected the spent casing, and felt the metallic warmth against her glove. It was rhythm now, smooth, measured, the way a heart slows before impact. 1,000 meters. She inhaled through her nose, steady, held, exhaled half, let her body sink into the earth until she was weightless. The crosshairs floated across the steel silhouette. She saw the dust swirl just left of target, counted the gusts between beats of her pulse. Adjusted. The trigger broke. Steel rang again, a sharper sound this time, bouncing off the valley walls. The crowd murmured, a ripple of voices quickly silenced. Didn't look up, didn't acknowledge them. It wasn't pride, it was focus. Pride distracted, precision demanded humility. She slid the bolt. Third target, 1,200 meters. Mirage danced heavier now, the heat bending light into a wavering river. Through the scope, the target seemed to swim, flickering just enough to betray depth. Her grandfather's voice returned. Don't chase the target, chase the space where it will be. She adjusted 2 clicks, waited. Wind shifted, steady but soft, brushing dust like fingers across stone. She pressed the trigger. The steel jumped. The crowd's murmur turned into a low exhale, 3 for 3. Stood stiffly near the rear, his bandaged hand clutched against his chest. His face was pale, but his pride still anchored him in place. Hadn't spared him a glance. She didn't need to. The real opponent wasn't him anymore. It was the distance. It was herself. 1,400 meters. The valley wind curled here, colliding with ridges, slipping down slopes. Unpredictable. It reminded her of Iraq, the convoy moving through dust, the storm that had almost stolen her shot. She remembered the fear in the voices over the radio, the urgency building as seconds bled into possible catastrophe. And she remembered how calm her finger had felt then, pressing a trigger that changed the ending. Her finger touched steel again now. She adjusted for the crosswind, a fraction left, exhaled. The rifle thundered. The target rang, faint but true, 4 for 4. The crowd grew restless. Whispers turned into hushed disbelief. Even the SEALs who had seen her work leaned in closer. Ignored them all. She was already chambering the next round. 1,600 meters. Here bullets were not fast, they were patient. 2 full seconds of flight time before impact, time enough to wonder, time enough to doubt, time enough for the world to shift. She steadied her cheek, eyes calm. She remembered the faces of those who hadn't believed, the instructors who had said she would wash out, the officers who had credited luck instead of skill, the after-action reports that omitted her name. And yet here she was, still. Her breath left her, the rifle cracked. 2 seconds stretched forever. Steel rang, a headshot. The murmurs fell silent now. Evan's arrogance seemed to falter beneath the weight of undeniable precision. But the real test wasn't done. 1,810 meters. This effective range wasn't supposed to stretch this far. Not in these winds, not with this mirage. This was where probability ended and impossibility began. Closed her eyes once, letting silence flood her. She thought of Martinez again, 19, his smile caught forever in memory. She thought of her father, once furious at her dreams, later proud beyond words as he drove her to sign papers. She thought of her grandfather, medals beside his bed, whispering that steel was silent. This wasn't just a shot. This was the weight of all those voices, carried downrange. Her eyes opened. She read the wind, counted the gusts, watched the dust swirl in patterns no one else could see. She adjusted 3 clicks right, half-click elevation, calculated the drift, the earth itself curving beneath her bullet. The world fell away. There was only her, the rifle, and the silence. She pressed. The roared, echoing like thunder trapped in mountains. 3 seconds of flight. 1, dust swirling mid-valley. 2, mirage flickering, bending the horizon. 3, the steel target rang like a church bell across the desert. The sound was pure, unmistakable, final. Lowered the rifle slowly, her body calm, her heart steady. She didn't need applause. She didn't need approval. She only needed the silence after the shot, the silence that proved steel had spoken. The crowd erupted anyway. Not cheers, not applause, just a low, stunned disbelief. Operators who had seen death and chaos leaned on one another, shaking their heads. Some whispered her name, some simply stared. Admiral stood frozen. 30 seconds passed before he moved, his jaw tight, his pride unraveling. Then slowly, deliberately, he lifted his left hand in salute. It was clumsy, awkward, not regulation, but it meant more than perfection. And in that moment saw something rare. Not victory, not humiliation, something closer to redemption. A man broken by his own arrogance, forced to see truth not by argument but by undeniable proof. He spoke, voice low but audible. "Staff Sergeant, the overwatch is yours." The operators nodded. The mission was decided. But as gathered her rifle, sliding it back into its case with reverence, she felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only the familiar weight, because proving herself was never victory. It was survival, and survival always came with silence. What happened when silence becomes the shield for an entire task force? When one woman's breath steadies the lives of dozens of men moving through hostile ground. The valley stretched wide, carved by centuries of wind and stone. Shadows fell long across its ridges as the sun crawled toward late afternoon. To anyone else, it was just another stretch of Afghan terrain, dry creek beds, jagged rock, patches of scrub. It was a living thing, a battlefield that breathed. She lay prone, her suit blending into the pale dirt and sparse grass. The rested on its bipod, the scope pressed against her eye. Her spotter, Chief Petty Officer Jackson, lay to her right, watching through. Neither spoke. Not because there was nothing to say, but because words had no place here. Breath, timing, rhythm, those were the language of the ridge. Below, the task force began to move. Rangers and SEALs fanned out in coordinated precision, their silhouettes shrinking against the valley floor. 6 high-value targets were meeting inside a compound 2 kilometers out, protected by layers of sentries, armed guards, and watchful eyes. The kind of fortress that was never meant to be cracked by force. That was why Overwatch mattered. Every operator below moved with confidence, because they knew if anything stirred on those, if a guard lifted a scope, if a sentry raised a rifle, someone unseen had their back. Adjusted her scope. A guard stood on a rooftop, cigarette glowing faintly as the last light touched the valley. She noted his posture, relaxed but not careless. She marked the angle, logged the wind, filed it all away for when the moment came. Jackson's voice was barely a whisper. "You good?" Didn't move her eye from the scope. "Always." It wasn't bravado, it was ritual, calm spoken into existence. Her finger rested near the trigger but not on it. Not yet. Timing mattered. Timing was everything. She could hear the faint crackle of radio chatter in her earpiece, rangers confirming positions, SEALs whispering, all of them unaware of the war being fought in her mind. Because no matter how steady her hands, how precise her aim, the ghosts always came. Martinez's face drifted unbidden. The 19-year-old's laughter, the way he used to hum under his breath. She had been tracking the sniper who killed him for 3 days, and then command pulled her away. Higher priority, they said. Different sector. He died because of someone else's decision, because her finger wasn't where it should have been. She exhaled through her nose, forcing the memory back into silence. Not gone, never gone, but quiet enough to do her job. Movement. A sentry shifted along the compound wall, shouldering his rifle, scanning the valley. Too close to spotting the rangers as they crept into position. His breath slowed. Her crosshairs settled. The thundered. The sound rolled across the valley like distant thunder, echoing off stone. The sentry crumpled, his body dropping into shadow. To the compound, it would sound like nothing more than a far-off detonation. One down. No one below broke stride. No one looked up, but knew they felt it, the invisible hand clearing their path. Jackson whispered, "Clean." Her cheek stayed pressed against the stock. She didn't nod, didn't smile. She was already scanning for the next. Another guard emerged from a side building, yawning, his AK slung loosely. He leaned against the wall, unaware of the figures moving less than 200 meters away. Adjusted elevation. Waited. Wind pressed harder now, tugging dust across the ridges. She counted 3 beats, let the gust pass. The shot cracked. Steel and lead collided. The guard folded silently into the dirt. 2 down. She inhaled, slow, steady. The task force edged closer. Through her scope, she saw them crossing open ground, vulnerable, shadows stretching long. If a single rooftop guard looked the wrong way, if a sentry squinted too long into the fading light, it would unravel everything. Her finger hovered, patient. This was the difference between competition shooters and snipers. Competition was speed. This was patience. Waiting until hesitation turned fatal, until mercy meant death for someone else. 3. A rooftop figure appeared, dragging a chair into place. He settled, glassing the valley with binoculars. For a heartbeat, thought he'd catch the faint shimmer of movement. But before the thought finished, her crosshairs steadied. The barked. Binoculars shattered. The body toppled backward out of sight. Jackson's whisper was low, reverent. 3. Blinked once, slow, calm. She was already finding the 4th. Inside the compound, laughter rose faintly. The HVTs unaware of the tightening noose. Her scope drifted past a narrow doorway. For just a second, the frame was filled by one of them, a man with a long beard, gesturing animatedly to his companion. Her finger brushed the trigger. She could end it here. 1 shot. But orders weren't death tonight, they were capture. Intelligence mattered more than bodies, so she held, swallowed the temptation, and waited. Another sentry rounded the rear corner, weapon up, scanning rooftops. He paused too long. Her scope steadied. The 4th shot cracked. His head snapped back. His body folded like paper. The operators below reached the compound wall. Breaches were set. Fingers tightened on triggers. The valley held its breath. 5. A man on a distant ridge, just outside the compound, lifted something to his shoulder. A rocket tube. His body stilled, her scope adjusted. Distance, 1,600 meters. Crosswind, 15 miles per hour. She calculated without thinking, every adjustment second nature now. She pressed the trigger. 2 full seconds. Then the man collapsed, the rocket clattering harmlessly down the slope. The operators moved, breach charges thundered, shouts echoed through the compound. Gunfire erupted, short, sharp bursts of chaos. But above it all, steady as stone, lay silent. Her scope swept, her breath calm, her trigger ready. The sixth came quickly, a runner darting across the compound roof, firing wildly into the valley. Tracked him, adjusting for speed, for angle, for panic. The roared. The runner dropped mid-stride, his weapon clattering into dust. Six. Inside the compound, chaos fell silent in less than 4 minutes. Doors blown, rooms cleared, targets secured. 6 HVTs dragged into the open, bound, blindfolded, furious. The kind of capture that turned wars sideways, that unraveled networks, that saved lives far beyond this valley. And through it all, the Overwatch never wavered. Lifted her cheek from the stock, finally, only when the last clear echoed over comms. She exhaled fully, the kind of breath she hadn't let herself take for the last 2 hours. Jackson glanced at her, his expression unreadable behind dirt and camouflage, but his voice carried weight. Flawless. She didn't answer. She just packed the piece by piece, reverent as always. Below, men celebrated, slapping shoulders, adrenaline bleeding into laughter, but stayed silent, because celebration wasn't hers. Her role was never joy, never applause. Her role was the unseen shield, the one no one thanked until the day it wasn't there. As they exfiltrated, dusk falling heavy across the valley, finally let herself think of one thing. Not victory, not redemption, just the quiet truth. For a few hours, silence had spoken louder than arrogance. Why does victory sometimes feel heavier than failure? Why does silence follow her even when the mission is flawless? It was uneventful. Trucks rumbled across the dark valley floor, headlights blacked out, engines low, tires grinding through loose gravel. The 6 captured HVTs sat bound and blindfolded in the back of one vehicle, flanked by rangers whose rifles never lowered. Their muffled curses mixed with the hum of engines, an ugly reminder that the mission wasn't clean. It was messy, necessary, fragile. Sat in the rear of another truck, the across her lap. She had already stripped, cleaned, and reassembled it once. The barrel still carried the faint scent of cordite, like ash clinging to skin. She rested her hand on the weapon, not possessive, not even protective, just familiar, like resting a palm against the back of an old friend. Around her, men spoke in low tones. Some laughed quietly, adrenaline still leaking into relief. Others recounted moments, the door that blew late, the guard who almost fired before going down. Jackson leaned against the wall, silent, his binoculars hanging limp around his neck. No one spoke to her. Not yet. Respect doesn't arrive in words. It arrives in silence, in the space left between glances. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, that silence wasn't cold. It was reverent. Back at Fob Chapman, the debrief lasted deep into the night. Maps spread again. Voices replayed every step. Intelligence officers hunched over laptops feeding information into databases. The 6 prisoners were already being processed, their names transmitted to higher command. Every face matched with years of blood, ambushes, and bombings. The kind of capture that shifted balance sheets of war. When the operators filed out, shoulders heavy but lighter than when they'd entered, stayed behind. Not out of duty, out of habit. She lingered in rooms like these because they never lingered for her. Admiral was there, still stiff, his hand bound in a proper splint now. His eyes followed her across the room, not hostile anymore, not dismissive, something else, something quieter. He cleared his throat. The sound was almost uncomfortable, like it didn't belong in his body. Staff Sergeant. She turned, her face unreadable, her posture neutral. Sir. For a moment he said nothing. His mouth worked, searching for words that never came easily to men like him. Then finally, I was wrong. The words fell flat, not dramatic, not rehearsed, honest in their clumsiness. Didn't answer. She had no desire to. Jaw flexed. I've been in the Navy 30 years, thought I understood shooters, thought I understood what it meant to carry weight. Tonight proved otherwise." He paused, shifting uncomfortably. "You carried them all, and you carried me too, even when I tried to pull the ground out from under you." Silence stretched, she let it. He finally continued, voice quieter. "The Silver Star citation is being drafted, for tonight, for your fire that kept them alive." Her eyes flickered just once, not at the medal, at the words, "kept them alive," that she could accept, that mattered. But she also knew what medals meant. Paper, ink, brass, nothing compared to the faces that still haunted her, the ones no medal ever erased. She gave a short nod, nothing more. "Understood, sir." Studied her for another beat, then straightened. It wasn't victory in his eyes. It was humility. A man realizing too late that pride had blinded him, but still choosing to bow anyway. He saluted again, left-handed, awkward, and then he was gone. The room emptied. The hum of generators outside filled the silence. Stood alone, her rifle case in hand, her body still heavy with the night's patience. Later in her quarters, a plywood room with a cot, a desk, and a battered trunk, she sat with the rifle laid across her knees. She ran her hand along the barrel, fingertips catching the scratches from years of use. This rifle had been with her in Iraq, in storms, in the dust. It had spoken for her when her own voice carried no weight. It had been the one constant. She opened her trunk. Inside, folded carefully, lay letters from her father, faded photographs of Montana fields, a tin box with her grandfather's Soviet medals, their ribbons frayed but colors still sharp. She lifted one medal, ran her thumb across the cold surface, and placed it beside the rifle. He had told her once near the end, as he lay in a hospital bed with lungs failing, "Medals are for the ones who need to be convinced they were brave. You don't need them, you live it." She had nodded then, she nodded again now. Her mind drifted to Martinez, to the convoy, to every name that had blurred into numbers in reports. They didn't write those names on medals. They wrote citations about precision fire enabling mission success. But the real truth lived in memory. Memory was heavier than brass. She leaned back, exhaled. For a moment she allowed herself to feel what the others felt, relief. A mission done. Lives saved. She closed her eyes, letting the silence wrap her. But even in silence, the ghosts remained. The next morning the fob bustled with energy. Word of the mission had spread. Soldiers who once looked past her now offered nods, subtle, quiet acknowledgments. Not conversation, not celebration, just recognition. At the chow hall, trays clattered, voices filled the air. She sat alone, as always. But this time no one sat far away. The distance shrank. Respect doesn't announce itself. It simply closes the gap. Chief Jackson passed by, pausing just long enough to place a hand on her shoulder. No words, none needed. Ate slowly, methodically, as she always did. But inside something shifted. Not pride, not even satisfaction, just a small easing of the weight. The kind that let her breathe a little deeper. That evening called the task force together. His voice was different now, stripped of arrogance, carrying something heavier. He spoke of the mission, of the lives saved, of the importance of merit over perception. He didn't mention her name until the end, and when he did, the room fell silent. "Staff Sergeant carried us," he said simply, "and I will carry that truth back with me." The salute he gave then was crisp, proper, regulation. And though no one clapped, no one cheered, every man in that room stood a little. Remained still, her face calm. But inside something quiet resonated. Not victory, not vindication, something simpler. Dignity. When the briefing ended, she walked out alone, the evening sun casting long shadows across the fob. The horizon glowed orange, mountains outlined in fading light. She paused, rifle slung across her shoulder, the wind tugging at her hair. For once she allowed herself a rare thought. Maybe it was enough. Not medals, not apologies, not recognition. just knowing that tonight silence had spoken for her and the right people had heard. What does a warrior do when the battlefield finally releases her? When the rifle that saved lives becomes a lesson in someone else's hands? 3 months after the valley stood on a different kind of ground. Fort, the heart of special operations. Red clay dust, humid air clinging to her skin, pine trees swaying in the distance. The landscape was different, but the silence was the same. Orders had arrived quietly, tucked into the back end of a routine debrief. Effective immediately, Staff Sergeant was reassigned as an instructor at the Special Operations Target Interdiction Course, SOTIC, soon to be renamed the Special Forces Sniper Course. The line that mattered most was short: first female instructor assigned. She carried the paper in her rucksack, as if it weighed as much as the range had stretched wide, dotted with silhouettes at varying distances. Wind flags snapped against humid Carolina air. Rows of students, rangers, special forces candidates, Marines stood at attention, rifles slung, eyes forward. They weren't ready for her. Walked past them, boots sinking into the clay. Her uniform was crisp, but her eyes carried the same weight from Afghanistan, from Iraq, from every mission that had silence into her bones. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't need to. Chief Warrant Officer Daniels, the course lead, gave her the barest nod. His expression unreadable, his approval locked away behind years of discipline. But his presence beside her was acknowledgement enough. She was here, whether the others liked it or not. He said quietly, "Lane 3 is yours." She set the down on the firing mat, the same rifle she'd carried across valleys. Students glanced, whispers barely audible, some curious, some skeptical, some resentful, recognized it all. She had lived it all before. She lay prone, pressed her cheek against the stock, and without a word fired. 800 meters. The steel rang. 1,000. Another ring. 1,200. Ring. She worked through distances in silence, every shot measured, every hit undeniable. When she stood, she spoke for the first time. Her voice carried no bravado, no arrogance, just truth. You'll fail if you chase pride. Pride makes you rush. Pride makes you miss. You don't get to miss, not out there. Her eyes swept across them, steady, cold. Precision saves lives. That's the only thing you're here to learn. Silence followed, but this silence wasn't dismissive. It was attentive, the kind that settles when men who thought they knew realize they don't. Training days had blurred into rhythm. Students rose before dawn, shouldered packs heavy with rifles and optics, hiked through woods until sweat blurred their vision. They fired prone, kneeling, standing. They learned wind, mirage, distance. Moved among them like a shadow, correcting posture, adjusting grips, asking questions that pierced deeper than surface. "What are you seeing in the grass?" she asked, crouched beside a sweating candidate. "Nothing, Sergeant." "Then you're blind, look again." And when he finally noticed the faint ripple of air bending blades to the left, his breath caught, because he understood. Her teaching wasn't loud. It wasn't showy. It was surgical. She spoke little, but every word landed like weight, and slowly even the skeptical ones leaned in closer when she spoke. But at night, when the ranges went silent, ghosts returned. She sat alone in her barracks room, the across her knees, oil rag in hand. The rifle gleamed under fluorescent light, scratches etched like scars. On her nightstand sat her grandfather's medals, the Silver Star citation beside them. She hadn't framed it. She hadn't told anyone. It wasn't pride. It was memory. Sometimes when silence pressed too heavy, she'd walk the empty ranges. The Carolina air hummed with cicadas, humid and thick, but she could almost hear Afghanistan in the distance. The wind, the dust, the ring of steel 2 kilometers away, and Martinez's voice, always Martinez's voice. One evening a student followed her, Private Torres, young, eager, too eager. "Sergeant," he said, breathless from jogging to catch up, "can I ask you something?" She stopped, turned, eyes narrowing slightly. "Ask." Back there when you hit 1,800 meters in crosswind, how do you stay calm? I mean, how do you not think about missing? She studied him. His face was young, unscarred. His voice carried no weight of failure yet. He hadn't buried anyone. He hadn't written a letter home to parents explaining why their son wasn't coming back. Her answer was slow, careful. I don't think about missing because I don't have permission to. Every shot is someone's life. You don't get to think about yourself when their lives depend on you. Tors swallowed hard. His eyes flickered, the truth pressing deeper than he'd expected. He nodded, almost reverent, and walked back toward the barracks. Remained in the field, the cicadas droning, her eyes staring at distant silhouettes that weren't really there. She whispered to herself, so soft even the night couldn't hold it, "Precision saves lives." Weeks passed. Students cycled through, tested, broken down, built again. Became known not for her silver star, not for her record shot, but for the silence of her instruction. The way she carried herself. The way she forced them to see what they'd been missing not just on the range, but inside themselves. But ghosts don't fade just because you're home. During a class on stalking exercises, a student tripped over underbrush, snapping a branch. The crack echoed across the range. Froze. For a split second, she wasn't in North Carolina. She was back in Helmand, back in that valley where Martinez had died. The branch was a rifle crack. The air smelled like dust. Her chest tightened. Jackson wasn't there to whisper, "Clean." The convoy wasn't saved. The 19-year-old was gone. She forced herself back, breath by breath, focus by focus, until the trees stopped being Afghanistan, until the students' nervous laughter filled the silence. She swallowed hard, face never changing. "Do it again," she ordered, "this time without the noise." The student nodded, embarrassed, and slunk back into the brush. But inside, her ghosts laughed. That night she opened her trunk again. Her grandfather's medals gleamed faintly in the lamplight. She lifted one, held it tight, as though the cold metal could ground her against the storm inside. "Never let them see you break," he had said. She hadn't, not yet. But some nights, she wondered if breaking was the only honest thing left. What happens when the war follows you home? When ghosts march beside you, even on training grounds that should feel safe? The students had learned quickly that didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her silence cut deeper than shouting ever could. A missed shot wasn't punished by anger, but by the weight of her stare, cold, steady, as if it looked past the mistake into something the student hadn't yet admitted to himself. She became a myth within weeks. The sniper who had humiliated a 3-star admiral. The woman who could split distance records in wind most shooters wouldn't touch. The one who had carried entire missions on her back. But legends are heavy to wear. Rose before dawn every morning, lacing her boots while the barracks still slept. The stayed by her cot, locked in its case, but she always touched it once before leaving. Not superstition. Ritual. Like pressing a palm against the memory of who she was before the ghosts. She walked the ranges alone sometimes before students arrived. The pine air smelled different from Afghan dust, but the silence was familiar. She would lie prone, cheek pressed against the stock, not to fire but to listen, to remember, to feel the weight of the trigger that had spoken for her when words were useless. But memory was not kind. Every time she closed her eyes, Martinez appeared. 19 years old, freckles, always humming. He didn't blame her. He never spoke. He just stood there, silent, as though asking why she had lived when he hadn't. She never had an answer. One humid afternoon, during a moving target exercise, a student missed his shot badly. The round kicked dirt half a meter short. His frustration showed, curse muttered under breath, jaw tight. Approached, boots sinking into the clay. She crouched beside him, voice steady. "You rushed." He scowled. "I had it. Wind shifted last second." Her eyes narrowed. She pointed toward the range. "Wind always shifts. You didn't wait. You thought about yourself, not the shot." The student bristled. With respect, Sergeant, I. Her voice cut through, sharp, low. With respect, you don't know what it means to miss when someone's life depends on you. The words landed heavier than intended. The student's face flushed. He looked away, ashamed. Stood, her chest tight, regret curling like smoke. She hadn't meant to lash out, but ghosts had spoken through her. Ghosts always did. That night she sat on her cot, the room dim except for the lamp. A letter waited on the desk, her father's handwriting shaky, uneven. She unfolded it slowly, already knowing what it would say. Her grandfather was dying. 2 weeks, maybe less. The man who had taught her to breathe between gusts, to trust silence, to see what others couldn't, his time was ending. Her chest ached in a way no battlefield had ever touched. She pressed the letter against her knee, eyes burning, breath shallow. For years she had carried his voice inside her. Now it would become memory, another ghost. The Army granted emergency leave. She flew home, across oceans and time zones until mountains gave way to Montana fields. The air smelled like hay and soil, sharp and clean. At the small house where she had learned to shoot, her grandfather lay in a narrow bed, oxygen tubing curling like vines across his chest. His eyes, still sharp beneath the weight of years, flickered when he saw her. He whispered, "Little one." She sank into the chair beside him, gripping his frail hand. The skin was paper-thin, but the strength beneath it still lived. She couldn't speak, not at first. He studied her uniform, the patches, the faint streaks of wear on her boots. His lips curved, proud and tired all at once. "You carry steel still." She nodded, her throat too tight to answer. He coughed, breath rattling. "They tell me Silver Star." Her jaw tightened. She hated the words on his lips, hated how empty they sounded compared to the ghost she carried. "It doesn't matter," she said softly. His eyes sharpened. "It matters to them, to you it cannot, do you understand?" Tears threatened, but she held them. She had never let him see her break. Not once. She wouldn't now. "Medals," he continued, his voice fatting, "are for those who need convincing. You do not, you live it, every breath, every shot." She pressed his hand to her forehead, her chest heaving with silent grief. 2 weeks later, he was gone. The funeral was small, private. His Soviet medals lay on the casket beside her Silver Star citation. She had wanted to tuck her medal inside, bury it with him, but her father shook his head. "Keep it," he whispered. "Not for pride, for memory." Back at the students noticed a shift in her. She spoke even less. Her stares lingered longer, but her instruction carried a deeper weight, sharpened by grief. During one session, she stood before the class, the resting beside her. "You think this is about marksmanship," she said quietly. "It's not. It's about dignity. It's about holding a life in your crosshairs and deciding you will not miss. Because if you do, someone's son doesn't go home. Someone's brother never calls again." The field was silent. No one moved. No one dared. Looked at their faces, young, untested, eager. She wanted to tell them the truth, that ghosts would come, no matter how many lives they saved. That silence would follow them home. That medals wouldn't erase what they couldn't forget. But she didn't. She just let silence finish the lesson. That night, alone in her barracks, she opened her trunk again. Her grandfather's medals gleamed beside her citation. For the first time, she placed them together, side by side, letting them touch. Her eyes closed. She whispered into the darkness, her voice breaking just once. "I didn't miss. I didn't miss." The room was silent, but for the first time it didn't feel empty. What remains when the war ends, but the silence does not? What do you leave behind when your life has been measured in shots and seconds? Months passed at Fort. Seasons turned over the ranges. Humid summers gave way to crisp autumns, pine needles scattered across red clay, and still the cadence of gunfire marked the days. For most, training was repetition, for it was ritual. Her students came and went, each carrying fragments of her instruction. They arrived with bravado, with swagger, with the belief that they were strong enough to bend war to their will. They left quieter, sharper, more patient. Some left with a hint of reverence in their eyes. She never asked for it, she never wanted it, but she saw it all the same. Chief Daniels, who had once regarded her with caution, spoke little about her presence. But one afternoon, as they walked the range together, he broke his silence. "You've changed the course," he said, his voice rough. She glanced at him, curious. They listened differently now, not just to you, to each other, to the wind. You've made them understand it's not about hitting steel, it's about carrying weight without flinching. She said nothing, but inside she let the words settle, not as pride, as truth. Her grandfather's passing had carved something deep inside her, a hollow space she carried into every lesson. His medals still lay beside her citation, side by side, a reminder that heritage and memory didn't compete, they merged. One in brass, one in steel. But ghosts still came, always. On quiet nights she would sit on her cot, rifle across her knees, and remember the valley. The 6 shots that silenced arrogance. The 7th that saved the mission. She remembered Martinez, 19, humming as though life were endless. She remembered the silence after every shot, the way it spoke louder than applause. And she wondered, not for the first time, if this was what her life would always be. A chain of silences, some dignified, some unbearable. Then came a day that etched itself deeper than any metal. It wasn't a mission, it wasn't combat, it was a graduation. The students, now qualified snipers, stood in formation. Their rifles gleamed under the Carolina sun. Family members gathered in small clusters, clapping, smiling, proud. Stood off to the side, her uniform pressed, her posture rigid. She wasn't the center. She never wanted to be. She was the shadow behind their precision, the silence that had shaped their discipline. As the ceremony concluded, Private Torres, the same student who had once asked her how she stayed calm, stepped forward. He hesitated, glancing at Daniels, then turned toward. "Sergeant," he said, voice trembling just enough to betray nerves, "we wanted you to have this." He handed her a plaque, small and simple, engraved with the names of the graduating class. At the bottom, one line etched deeper than the rest: "She taught us to see what others miss." Her throat tightened, she didn't let it show. She nodded once crisp. "Carry it well," she said. But when she returned to her quarters that evening, plaque in hand, she set it beside the medals in her trunk. For the first time, she let herself sit in silence, not haunted, but humbled. Weeks later, as the sun sank low over, she walked the range alone. The wind stirred softly through the pines. She lay prone, steady, cheek against stock, but there were no targets today, no silhouettes, no distances. She closed her eyes, listened. And in that silence she felt them all. Her grandfather's voice, her father's reluctant pride, Martinez's hum, the weight of every soldier she had shielded from shadows they would never even know existed. She breathed in, breathed out. The war would never leave her, the ghosts would never fade, but maybe that was the point. Maybe ghosts weren't curses. Maybe they were guardians, reminders that dignity isn't loud. It doesn't demand. It doesn't need recognition. It simply acts. The wind shifted, dust lifted faintly across the range, smiled just once. "Never let them see you break," she whispered. And she didn't. Not in war, not in silence, not ever. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.